Hey everyone, it's Sean. Thanks for checking out the first part of this all English episode. I talked about my love for Marvel comics and comic books and how that started, and I also talked about some of the history of Marvel comics and how that has changed over the years and that type of thing. Thanks for all your comments, and thank you for your messages as well. That's awesome. It's kind of given me a bit of a confidence boost to do some more of these. So thanks for checking out the video as well on Sota's YouTube page, and thanks for all the feedback there. If you haven't already, make sure you follow Sota on YouTube and on Instagram. If you just search for Eigo no Sota, and it should be the first result up there. You can follow me on Instagram as well, Sean Bradley 1986. And yeah, keep all of your comments coming in. So let's continue with part 2 of Marvel Comics. Okay, so in part 1, I talked a lot about when I was quite young and living in the north part of England in Halifax and going to my first ever comic book shop. But when we got into the kind of second half of the 90s, like 1995, 1996, I moved from Halifax in the north of England to the Midlands, which is in the middle. It was just outside of Birmingham. I've mentioned Birmingham before on the台本なし英会話 lesson podcast. In my introduction, I talked about Birmingham. If you remember, Sota was trying to practice saying Birmingham and Buckingham and how they are two different places. So yeah, in the second half of the 90s, I moved just outside of Birmingham to a place called Tamworth. And Tamworth, you know, like Halifax, it was known as being a small market town. And obviously, over the last 25 years or so, that has changed a lot. You know, online shopping, big warehouse stores, that kind of thing. It's kind of taken over, and the markets are kind of dying out. But when I moved there as a kid, it was still very much kind of, you know, Saturday, Sunday market town. And it was, you know, Tamworth is a really nice place. There's lots of history there. But unfortunately, unlike Halifax, there weren't any comic book shops. So for a long time, when I first moved to Tamworth, I couldn't enjoy my comic books like I could when I lived in Halifax. So I was kind of missing that feeling of waiting to get a comic book every month. So I started to look around and see like what I could do. And there was a local newsagent in the middle of town, and they had this special kind of order sheet. So if you were really into something very specific, you know, like fishing or bowling or something, you could choose the book or the magazine from this order list, and you could have it ordered especially for you. So I remember I went there with my mom one day, and we were looking for somewhere where I could get this, you know, I could get like a Spider-Man comic or some kind of Marvel comic. And we went into this newsagent, and they had this order list. So we had a look at the order list, and right at the top, there it was. It was called Astonishing Spider-Man. Astonishing Spider-Man. And Astonishing Spider-Man was a reprint. So in part 1, we mentioned about reprints, how in America they have the thin comics, but when they come to England, they get reprinted into like a special edition. So the original comic would be The Amazing Spider-Man in America, but when it came to England and it got reprinted and changed, it was called Astonishing Spider-Man. But I could order, you know, this Astonishing Spider-Man, and I could get back to reading my comic books again. And they had this reservation system. So you would kind of fill out your name and the magazine that you wanted, And then every month they had this huge like filing cabinet, and when you open the filing cabinet, there were little folders with customer numbers on there. So every customer had, like a customer number for whatever book or whatever it was that they'd ordered. So I had my own little folder where every month this issue of Astonishing Spider-Man would arrive, and after school I could rush down to the newsagents, hand over my pocket money, and I could get my comic book again. So I could finally get back to reading comic books again. So that would have been when I was in, I guess, primary school and high school as well, like the first half of high school. So, I collected this comic book, every month without fail. So eventually I had about 250 issues of this Astonishing Spider-Man comic book. And I thought, oh gosh, I've got so many of these comic books now. Maybe it's time for me to start branching out and looking at other comic books. And then that's when I started to become interested in other superheroes like Fantastic Four or Iron Man or the Incredible Hulk. And my collection just kept growing and growing from there. Also, like sometimes if I went to a charity shop or a secondhand shop, I could find random comic books that people had, donated to charity, and I could pick up those comic books as well. So yeah, I guess in high school I was kind of obsessed with comic books, and I had this huge collection, and I'd just sit in my room all night just reading issue after issue after issue, and the collection just wouldn't stop, And then I remember, I think it would have been at the end of the 90s, so like 1999. I remember I had this issue of Astonishing Spider-Man, and in the back section of the comic book, there would always be letters from fans who had written to to Stan Lee, asking him about, what do you think about this character, or what's going to happen in this story? And, Stan Lee would write his message and reply to every fan, which was great. And I remember around 1999, there were rumors. Rumor, is it Rumour? There were rumors of a Spider-Man movie being made. So my, little 13-year-old brain was like, just exploded. Like, a Spider-Man movie? That's awesome, right? And like, I know that Spider-Man had already appeared on TV shows and movies. Actually, maybe you remember many years ago, Japan already had a Spider-Man movie. No, not a movie. It was a TV show, sorry. A Spider-Man TV show. But there's a kind of funny story about that TV show, is that it wasn't directly connected to Marvel in any way, because they just took the character of Spider-Man and then tried to make it appeal to a Japanese audience. So they added like big robots that were fighting each other, and like random monsters, and this whole weird backstory of how Spider-Man got his powers. And yeah, it just wasn't connected in any way to like the comic books, really, other than the name and maybe the costume. But in America, they made some movies in the 1970s, I think, but they were quite low budget, so the special effects were kind of not very good. So this was, the end of the 90s, about to start the millennium, and there were rumors about a Spider-Man movie. So, I remember this feeling and being so excited to possibly be able to see my favorite character, Spider-Man, come to the big screen. so in native English, sometimes to describe movies or the cinema, we say the big screen. So yeah, Spider-Man was coming to the big screen. And I remember also there was a letter from a fan asking about the Spider-Man movie, and Stan Lee mentioned about keeping an eye out for him, because he might be able to appear in the movie. So that blew my mind as well, like thinking, wow, so we're going to see Stan Lee in a Spider-Man movie, like somehow. So all of these rumors were going crazy. And I remember, in the year 2000 and 2001, people were talking about this Spider-Man movie being made. Obviously, sadly, in 2001, we had the 9/11 terrorist attack in America. And obviously, with that being in New York, that meant that a lot of the Spider-Man movie had been cancelled. Parts of the movie had to be changed because it had shots of the Twin Towers like in the movie. So the Spider-Man movie got delayed again and again because they had to edit all of these parts out. And I think eventually it was released in 2002, I think. 2002. Yeah, I think it was 2002. Yeah, it was released eventually, yeah. But I remember when it finally came out at the cinema, I went to the cinema to watch it maybe 3 or 4 times. As a kid, it just blew my mind that I could watch this character that I'd been reading about and looking at in comic books for, at that time, it would have been about 10 years, 10 years of reading about this character and then seeing this character kind of come to life on the big screen. That was amazing for me. Looking back now at the movie, it wasn't that great. It was super cheesy, and the acting wasn't so good, I think. Cheesy, which is Cheesy. Cheesy just means it's kind of lame, or I guess it would be like full of really bad jokes, or just, uncomfortable or embarrassing to watch, that type of thing. But, it was the first time that Spider-Man had really had a proper movie, so I didn't really care about any of that negative side of it at the time. And it had this kind of charm to it, this kind of lovable quality, I think, because it was so cheesy and because it was so bad. And also, Stan Lee had a small cameo in that movie as well. Cameo is Cameo. And cameo is just like a small appearance or like a small part in a performance in a TV show or a movie. So yeah, Stan Lee appeared in the movie, and that was great as well, to see this guy that I worshipped so much just appear in the movie as well. So that was when comic books, I think, really started to change, not just comic books, but it changed the entertainment industry, because now superhero movies were becoming super popular, and some of them, even more popular than some of the comic books. So if we kind of fast forward to 2008, that's when Iron Man was first released. And this was the kind of the start of Marvel really investing and pushing their Marvel Cinematic Universe. So they were moving away from comic books and really pushing this kind of movie world that they'd been creating. The problem with this was that I vaguely remember the full details, but around 2000, the comic book industry was really struggling. Like, people weren't buying comic books that much anymore. They were kind of losing interest, I think, and people were using the internet more. The internet was becoming more and more popular, and in its panic, Marvel kind of rented its characters to other companies, so that those companies, if they wanted to, they could make movies to do with those characters. So, for example, Sony actually got the rights to make Spider-Man movies, which is where that first Spider-Man movie came from, because Marvel kind of loaned them the rights to use Spider-Man in a movie. Fox Studios, they owned Fantastic Four, so they made a Fantastic Four movie. Universal, they owned Hulk, so they made a Hulk movie. But Iron Man, I think, was produced. No, it was made by Paramount Pictures, but it was produced by Marvel Studios. So this was the first real movie where Marvel had full control over their character and what they wanted to do with it, and the direction that they could take it. And it was funny because a lot of people were thinking, why, out of all of the characters that Marvel has, Spider-Man and Fantastic Four and Hulk, why would they choose Iron Man? Because at that time, Iron Man was a kind of B-list or B-grade character, right? Because in most people's opinions, if you're Marvel and you own all of these amazing characters, you would go with like a Spider-Man movie, of course. But because Sony owned the rights to Spider-Man, Marvel didn't have that many characters left that they could make a movie with. So when it was first released, there was lots of criticism, like why are you starting this movie with Iron Man, and they cast Robert Downey Jr. As Tony Stark, and he was perfect in that role. I thought he was really good. He played it perfectly. But there were other movies that were coming out at the time as well. We had the X-Men movies, and it really, just having all of these movies coming out really helped people get back into comic books. I was still collecting comic books, back in 2008, but my collection had grown drastically. So I'd been collecting comic books at that point, for well over 15, almost 20 years. And I had to buy like I had to buy a few of them actually, very kind of special comic book boxes, like these long white, very tough cardboard boxes to keep all of my comic books in, to keep them in good condition. And each comic book would also be put inside a plastic sleeve with a piece of cardboard down the back of the comic book to keep it from bending, so it would be in perfect condition. But that it's kind of funny, because if we go back to what I was telling you guys in part one, my first ever comic book, I was coloring it in with coloring pencils, right? And now here I am, a few years later, and I'm protecting my comic books in these boxes with the plastic sleeves and making sure that they're all in mint condition. Mint condition means just very, very good quality, very good high condition. So mint, M-I-N-T, mint condition. But yeah, even though I was still collecting comic books, I started to explore different characters. So, X-Men, the Avengers. So I was really excited when they announced this Iron Man movie was coming out. And one of the things that I loved about the Avengers comics was how all of these superheroes would come together. So Iron Man and Thor and Captain America. And I'd been reading all of these stories separately, but the Avengers comic books would always bring these heroes together, and there would always be like a double page of all of these characters all side by side in their fighting poses, and Captain America would be in the middle shouting, Avengers assemble, and it looked so cool, just having this big double page with all of these characters and just ready for this big fight, right? So over the years, from the original Iron Man movie from like 2008, they started to release more movies because Iron Man did so well at the box office. So Marvel Studios started to make enough money to produce films by themselves. So they didn't have to use Paramount or Sony or any of these other production studios. They could make the movies themselves. So they could take the story or use whatever characters they wanted. Unfortunately, characters like Spider-Man, they still belong to Sony. So every couple of years, there are these negotiations between Marvel and Sony and Fox and all of these other studios to try and see which characters they can use in their movies. And it's all really confusing, all because, back in 2000, Marvel were in a tough situation and they had to make money by hiring those characters out to these movie studios. But now they're doing really well and they're super successful and they're owned by Disney. They don't have this financial problem anymore. So now it's become an issue of, can we get these characters back to Marvel Studios because we sold them all to all of these different companies? But slowly they're starting to come back, I think Disney bought Fox Studios recently, which means now that Fantastic Four belongs to Marvel again, which is huge news. So now they can start to work and build their cinematic universe, building towards something even more amazing than just the comic books. So I think we'll wrap up there. So that's the end of part 2. I hope you guys enjoyed learning a little bit more about my love for comic books and how the Marvel world moved from comic books and more into the film industry. But still, I love my comic books. I still collect my comic books now. But in part 3, I guess we can start to explore how my kind of love for comics has changed since I came to Japan. So make sure you follow me on Instagram, Sean Bradley 1986. Don't forget to follow Sota as well on Instagram and on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to his videos as well, because I'm doing a few more videos with him. So we've got some really great ideas, and I can't wait for you guys to see it all. So see you guys soon for part 3. Excelsior!